Convenience has a lot of definitions. It started out in 1927 with extended hours operation at Southland Ice Company. It has evolved into one-stop shopping. It's evolved into delivery. It's evolved into all kinds of things. We want to spend some time, though, and find out what customers think of convenience and what word do they most want to see associated with it. Joining us for our conversation today about convenience and what people think about convenience, where it's going, and how you can take advantage of that is Adam Rosenblatt. He is the founding partner of Bold Decision, which is a opinion research analysis company, all those things. But they've worked with us for a number of years with NACS to just look at what is consumer sentiment, how does it affect your business, what's on people's minds, all of that. So welcome once again, Adam.
Thanks for having me, Jeff.
So normally this time of the year, we're talking about gas prices. We're not talking about gas prices today, but we will be building out that survey. We'll talk about that a little bit later. But what we wanted to do was we're taking the last few surveys and looking at specific issues. The previous one, we looked at labor, we looked at some other things, just to get some insights that we share out. This one, we really wanted to dive in a little bit different and just have the customer kind of tell us what's on their minds. And do you want to kind of walk through the purpose of this in setting up the survey? Then we'll dive into some of the results.
Absolutely. A lot of times when we do surveys, when you hear about surveys and polls, you're really thinking a lot about numbers. And in this, of course, we did interview a number of people. We actually interviewed 606. But I think we're going to be talking a little bit less about percentages here because we actually did a lot of exploration. We did a lot of feeling. I hate using soft words like that, but we did. It actually almost bordered closer to a focus groups. And we indeed know a lot about the industry. The industry knows a lot about the industry. But the customers actually know even more than us because they're the ones who are going in every single day. Whether or not they're right or wrong in what they know, I won't be the judge of that. The listeners can judge and decide on that on certain things. In fact, maybe they are wrong. But going into what is convenience, right? We can open up Merriam-Webster and look at a dictionary and see what actually is the technical definition of convenience.
Now you're sounding like one of those valedictory speeches where Webster defines, that's usually how they all start, isn't it?
Exactly. But we're not going to quite do that. We actually did that sort of in the survey and say, what is convenience to you? What do you hear when you hear in your mind the word convenience or the word convenient? And then we actually went through with a list of a lot of things that I think all of us who are listening would agree is a convenience store, and other things that some of us wouldn't necessarily agree is a convenience store. But sometimes the actual customer says, yeah, you know what, that fits convenience, because to different folks, particularly based on age, that idea is changing and that picture is changing. So even if the stores are not necessarily all changing, the picture in people's minds are. So this was really more of an exploration survey rather than one where we know the answers or we know the questions in advance and say, not that we know the answers in advance ever, but we know what we want to ask. This one, we don't really know, or at least we didn't really know what is convenient to people. We know what we put in front of them, but we don't necessarily know exactly what they find most convenient, even if we know what they buy and what they actually do in the stores.
So a couple things for definitions before we dive into the numbers and what they actually say. And now I feel like one of these sports guys that's just about to now announce the brackets or something like that. You know, we've gone through all the background. By the way, the April NACS magazine is out. This is one of the feature stories in there, so look for it there. But a couple things that Adam brought up. Normally in polling, there's questions that may select all of these, select one of the above, select all of these, etc. Then he had mentioned focus groups. Focus groups are when you get a limited group of people, usually only no more than half a dozen, because you want to just get what they're thinking. You've seen them on news shows after a speech or something like that. But we also asked a bunch of open-ended questions. And what open-ended questions are things like, we'll start out with the first one. What word comes to mind when you hear the word convenience? And then somebody just types a word or a series of words, and Adam and team create word clouds based on those. So you get a really good representation of how many times the specific word was said and what it means. And it is truly anything you want to put out there. So, first question, what word comes to mind when you hear the word convenience? What was the answer?
The word that pops off the page almost literally is easy. Easy, right? And it's a phrase, it's an idea. What exactly does easy mean? It means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. But we saw that overall when we looked at the convenience. The other thing that we did, because we care about the word convenience, but we also care about the concept, right, of convenient. So we asked that question too and said, what comes to mind to a different set of people, right? So we're not going to spoil it that they already have that idea of easy in their mind. But we said, what comes to mind when you hear convenient? And they said close, right? So there's this nexus between these two. I need something easy. I need something close, right? A lot of times we talk about fast as well, and there's a nexus between these ideas. But something easy, something close, that's really what we are, or what it is that we should be if we want to fit what the customers want.
And when we design these surveys, it's designed to kind of walk down a path, not to have a path that we're forcing them down to force answers, but how do you build out something? So we know that people want something that is easy. We want something that is close. And then we explored, what do they think is a convenience store, and asked just basic questions, had a laundry list of things. What, in your mind, what does a convenience store have in terms of items? And there are really no surprises there, though. But it is important to verify as we walk down this path with customers, with consumers, to learn how they're thinking. I'm correct, though, in saying there were no surprises in terms of what they thought convenience stores have, right?
Yes, I'd say yes, but there's, the caveat to it is the convenience store is really defined by two different items. And I think that's what sets us apart from a lot of other types of stores that are really defined by a particular item or types of items. I won't name names, but, a particular type of electronics store might be known for selling TVs or computers, or certain grocery stores, right, are defined by the actual specific products that they're selling, right, specific foods. A lot of the things that really popped for us in the survey is not just items. Sure, beverages and snacks, no shock there. That is what we sell. But it's ideas, right, and it's specific experiences almost that we uniquely sell. Open 7 days a week. That one was off the charts at the very, very top. 96% of people said that it's very or somewhat relevant to a convenience store. So that's not a product. That's something that we do. Same with a quick experience. The open 24/7. So aside from just that it's every day of the week, the fact that it's open at all those hours and has the products in stock, those are very unique attributes that really only apply to convenience stores, and people associate it with us very, very strongly, and not just the fact that there's beverages and snacks that are readily available.
And
or gas, for that matter.
Yeah, exactly. And in looking at in building this out, we know by the official definition that NACS has. It's on our website. We know over years of how do we talk internally what a convenience store is. It's very clear to us. What we wanted to see was, how did consumers, did they agree with us? And I thought there was another interesting open-ended question. We went through all these ways and looking at, what do you think a convenience store is, etc. Then we said, do you have a favorite convenience store? And if some people said yes, then we said, write down the name of that store. We didn't populate it with a list of the top 20 store names or something like that. But I thought that was one of the big ahas in terms of what we learned from what people said their favorite convenience stores were.
Indeed. One of the cool things that's the nature of this industry is that there wasn't a single store that resonated to the top. Sure, there are some names that some people would think of. Again, in the top 20, you can guess which ones those are. But overwhelmingly, the list was made up by small stores that honestly I'd never heard of, and probably, the listeners have never heard of, because they're places that aren't chains, they aren't franchises. It's just a single store that's doing something really good, right? That makes people like that store. We did go deeper and ask, why do you prefer that store? People were saying, everything. Like literally, that's what they would say. That store has everything, everything about them. They're close. They have what I need. They're located in a good area. They always have the products. People are really, really happy with their stores. And that was also one of the quantitative numbers that we saw. 74% of people have a positive number, a positive view towards convenience stores. So that's good. But what it's worth comparing against is it's only 5% who have a negative. So it's not like it's 25% or 26% who hold a negative view. It's not a binary. There's a lot of people, rightfully, who say, I don't really have an opinion on convenience stores. I don't wake up in the morning thinking about that, the way that people wake up feeling issues or feeling on political topics or personalities and having, opinions on. A lot of people have never really thought about convenience stores in the depth that anybody who's listening to this podcast probably has thought about convenience stores. But they're generally positive, and that's good. And honestly, that's not the case for a lot of industries. A lot of realms would love to have numbers like that.
So essentially, what, about 75% to 5, and then 20% said, nah, I'm good. I'm not going to answer this one. But that's a 15-to-1 ratio of people who have positive thoughts about an industry compared to those who have a negative thoughts about the industry. I know every day is a work in progress, but that's a really, really nice number.
Yeah, if you could get the convenience store industry to run for office, a lot of people would vote for them. I don't know what office they could hold, but these are great numbers. I mean, most political candidates would be begging for numbers like this. Another number, just to throw out some numbers that I really enjoyed, again, because I'm slightly weird on this type of stuff, but we had a fun question that we've asked in the past about, do you enjoy shopping at convenience stores, or is it something that's more of a chore? And again, we found a similar set of numbers here, 73%. So 7 out of 10 people, almost 3/4 of people saying, I enjoy shopping at stores. Only 15% sort of found it to be a drag and said it's a chore, which I didn't know if we would see a lot of people kind of just being bothered of, I have to go to the store, right? I have to get gas. This is a requirement. I'm out of XYZ item where I got to get this. It's not. And again, some of the reasons why it is that way is there is not just one convenience store, even in any particular town, right? If you don't like that one, you could go to the other one, and you probably now do go to the other one if you didn't like the experience you were having at the old store. So that's one of the great things. It makes it challenging to be an operator, but it's one of the good things for the consumers and why they like us.
Yeah, and it's really important right now when we look at the broader economic scope, and trips are down, trips are up. How are people feeling, with the economy, et cetera? There's a lot of ways somebody can say, nah, I don't feel like going out, or I don't feel like doing that. And there's a lot of competition, whether it's online or other brick and mortar. So you really have to find a reason for somebody to take that right-hand turn, or however they're coming into your store, to go there. And we've put a big focus in talking about that customer experience. It doesn't have to be a disco bathroom or a 70,000 square foot store with mascots, but it just has to be, there's some sort of vibe going on here where there's energy in there. It starts with the staff, music, whatever you want to say, makes to that experience, and make it where somebody says, yeah, this is a trip it is not a burden. It's something I like. And those were great numbers to see. Want to transition. You had mentioned, we talked about people saying they had a favorite convenience store. There were also a sizable percentage that picked the name of a store that wasn't a convenience store. There were dollar stores listed there. There was Walmart listed there. There were some others that were non-traditional. And I want to kind of segue into how we also wanted to see if somebody says Dollar General is a convenience store, that's their version of convenience. So it's really important to understand that's how they're thinking. So I think that led to some other interesting questions that we uncovered in how that changing definition of convenience is happening by age demographic.
Yeah, we asked about, almost a dozen different stores as well, or dozen different types of stores. And the ones that, most definitely resonated of saying, almost universal agreement, like 90% plus of people saying, yeah, this is a convenience store. When we talk to anybody, is something like a mini mart, corner store, gas station. We get universal agreement on things like that among almost everybody. When we go to other things that are almost, I'd say, gas adjacent, truck stop, travel center, highway rest stop, or even a general store, which again is sort of a more regional thing, we get a lot of agreement. But where stuff starts to break down in the numbers and we start to see sharper divides is where we get into dollar stores, because we actually saw 62% of people saying yes, or, yes, sometimes a dollar store is a convenience store, even though we would sort of more traditionally say that's not. Same with a bodega or deli. So it starts to separate out, but where we start to see it separate out even more sharply is at an age thing. Again, it's an experience thing. The younger customers, ones who've grown up around the internet, with the internet, and not understanding I'm not saying that, some of the older customers were at that first gas station, but the ones who are more associated with, honestly, some of also the more negative attributes of the industry, not some of the transformations that have happened over the past 10 or 20 years, but the more conventional view, that's not in the minds of somebody who's 20 years old, right? They're not going to think about a squeegee, a very, very dirty squeegee or a hubcap attached to a gas station bathroom key. They're not going to think about that because we've done a good job moving away from some of that stuff where that's still sort of baked into the minds of the younger consumers. So they're not seeing some of those attributes that we see as well for the older, which is the majority of the population.
And the beauty of polling is you get all kinds of subsets and different looks at the numbers, not just X percent said this and Y percent said this, but it's also what did they say across regions? What did they say across some other demographics? And for us, the ones that we always like to look at are age, and you teed that up. Two age demographics that we look at subsets are, and these are the way it's broadly used across all kinds of polling, but it's 18 to 34. Age is 18 to 34. That's one demographic. And then another one is age 35 to 50. And most of the time, you see in surveys that there's not much of a disparity between the two. But it was really surprising to me that there was a real difference in how these two age groups thought about what a convenience store should have and what do they want at a convenience store. And so we asked things like extended hours of operation, sells gasoline, sells tobacco products, etc. All of these were much higher indexed to that 35 to 50 crowd than 18 to 34, which says that there's some changes here. And then conversely, 18 to 34 had a significantly different opinion on what should be sold at convenience stores.
Yep. So some of the items, when we look at the younger ones, right, they were seeing things like just household goods, toilet paper, electronic chargers like phone chargers, even selling groceries and having the products available. Those were things that mattered a bit more to the younger customers, and they're associating it. Whereas, as you said, much more on the not that they're older attributes, but the more traditional attributes of gas, tobacco, beer, 24/7, that type of stuff really resonates with the older, because to some degree for the younger, those types of things are available in a lot of places now. It's not exclusively that you have to go to a convenience store to get these types of things. When we looked, as I was mentioning, at the types of stores too, the younger customers really saw pharmacies and drugstores saying, yeah, I think that's sort of a convenience store. Whereas the older customers, or at least the 35 to 50s, were saying that's not necessarily a convenience store. Same with delis and dollar stores. Those are stuff that the younger customers are saying, yep, those are convenience stores, and convenience, both convenient and convenience stores. Whereas the olders are drawing a little bit more of a traditional distinction between the two.
And I think the message for retailers is the younger consumer, the one that everybody prizes, is thinking differently. So that doesn't mean you need to radically change your business, but you need to think about how they are redefining convenience and thinking, do you match it? What do you need to do differently merchandising? What do you need to do differently in communicating your offer? Because people will find convenience wherever they need to find it, because as far as they're concerned, pretty much everybody sells convenience.
Yep, it really is. And especially with closeness and some of the items, if you're not a store that's selling a very unique item and a unique product that you have, you either need to be selling a unique item, or you need to be selling an experience, right? If you want to be beating out the other store, right? If you're going to be the store that, you're offering a friendly face when the person walks in, or, giving them something memorable, as we've pointed out in the past when we've talked about it through other surveys, we found a lot of times you might be, if you're working at a store, you might be the first person or the last person that customer talks to during the day. So you have a lasting impression, and it's about, that type of experience happens much more with a convenience store than is happening at a grocery store, or like I said, at a Best Buy. Nobody's really having an experience like that the way that they can have at a convenience store, and it has a lasting impact, right? And that'll determine whether somebody keeps coming back or potentially never comes back again if they have a really bad experience.
So we'll wrap up talking about future polls and a couple other side items, but I want to close what we're talking about with this survey with the whole, bring us back to the beginning, where what we heard was people said they want one word, and that's easy. And there's a reason that this office supply store, where you may argue it's not necessarily the easiest place in the world, or maybe it is, I'm sorry if you like them, but they have an easy button. And I'm sure that went through some polling, that went through some analysis, and they said, hey, do you know what? Our customers want easy, and if we have an easy button, whether or not it's a marketing ploy or real, that's a way to connect with people. And I think everybody remembers that. And it's like, yeah, I want an easy button.
Yeah, and easy means a lot of different things, same as what convenient means. One of the tricky things that we've seen over the years, it's sort of good and bad for the convenience store industry. Easy and convenient doesn't necessarily mean cheap, right? That's going to be challenging, I think, in the economic climate that we're in, and how people are feeling right now, that we want to offer easy, we want to offer convenient. We don't want to be, using that in a bad way for people and taking advantage of people while doing that. But there is easy options, and we've explored in the past. We didn't do it as extensively in this survey, but one of the fascinating things to me is self-service and that idea, because we see that happening in a lot of other channels. But there's, again, an age divide when it comes to this type of stuff, because some people, those younger customers, they're very excited by the easiness and the self-service options, automatic checkout, things like paying with your phone, paying with your apps. But for other customers, part of the convenience store is the experience, right? It's not actually the way of saying, hey, I'm going to go out of my way to avoid talking to a clerk. It's the opposite. They're going into a store because they want to chat with that clerk, because they know the clerk's name and the clerk knows their name, and they just want to chit chat, and maybe it's holding up the line, or maybe there is no line because they're there at 5 a.m. So that to people, some people that's easy, some people it's not, but for everybody it's that experience. And I think it's why we get those like 3/4 of people being happy with us, whereas you don't have that in a lot of other stores and a lot of other just realms that we interact with on a daily basis.
Well, 15-to-1 ratio. Let's run for office. So and by the way, these findings, April, NACS Magazine, nacsmagazine.com, or it's in your mailbox, print version, or if you don't get it, sign up there. We will mail them to you. We have surveys in NACS Magazine about every other month, and we talk to Adam almost as frequently. Where I had alluded to in the beginning, this is about the time of the year. There's a discussion of the spring transition to summer blend fuel. So probably after we hang up here, we'll be kind of sketching out what we should be looking for in terms of what is consumer sentiment with gas prices and what's going on with fueling and some other issues. So if you have a suggested question, shoot it our way. We want ideas for what you think are interesting questions, and that leads me to one final thing. When we did the last survey, that was, I believe, in the February issue of NACS Magazine, we stuck in a question about the penny, and that came up super last minute. Maybe it was the April or March issue, and it was just a literally an audible at the last minute. It's like, hey, there's some discussion about getting rid of the penny. Let's throw some questions in there. I talked about it a little bit on a podcast and looking at what would killing the penny do, but it was super interesting to look at the polling numbers and see how people thought about the penny. And I think that was just a perfect example, Adam, of how to construct something that is spur of the moment to kind of guide where we should be thinking on an issue. Was there anything that you took away from that whole look at the penny and whether or not people were in favor or not of getting rid of it?
Yeah, it was a fun look at a question because it's a topic that really hadn't been thought of before. It's been brought up in the past, but it's not a very high priority thing to most people. So a lot of people don't have strong opinions one way or the other. But what we did in the survey was tested it the way we would for a political candidate, right? Somebody, Joe Nobody, is running for office and nobody has an opinion of Joe Nobody, but we test different things. Maybe he's a veteran, maybe he's a small business owner, maybe he did something good, maybe he did something bad, right? We test all those different things in a survey, but we kind of did that with the penny arguments as well. So we saw off the bat about a third of people said, I'm okay with, getting rid of the penny. That sounds fine. But when we started telling them different things, and especially some of the stuff like how expensive it is to make the penny, the fact that the penny costs more than a penny, and also just pointing out that pennies are lying around, right? We're largely a not penny-centric society in terms of how we pay for, bills and whatnot, and just literally we use dollar bills more than we use pennies, right? So those types of things actually resonated the most. Unfortunately for Jeff, some of the arguments that he was making, which are actually true and matter a lot to the convenience store industry about the speed of the transactions and making things easy, that's great. And it's a very valid point. But that's actually not the thing. If we were leading the charge, no pun intended, to get rid of the penny, that wouldn't be the central arguments, right? It would be the fact that a penny costs nearly 3 cents to make. But once we exposed voters or people, they weren't really voting on this, but when we exposed the customers and consumers to this, we got support up to 50%, right? Or even above. So that's great. From doing this. Now, again, there's a lot of other pressing issues going on in the world right now, so I don't know if this is going to be front and center, but it was a fun little exercise to do and see what really mattered to people. And again, I think it puts in context, too, some of those other numbers of how great we're doing, right, in terms of how much they associate us with convenience. They associate us with not just products. We're not solely defined by what we sell, because other stores sell those same items, right? Groceries, even an electronics store might have some of those same items that we sell at the checkout. So it's the other attributes that we have, that we uniquely have, that we need to double down on to be stronger.
And that exercise was fun. But what it also did was it told the media when they called, when they saw the information, they contacted us. We had the best information on consumer data than anybody. So it's getting in front of an issue. And when people understand that NACS has great, or the industry has great data on this, then we presumably have great data on this. And so it feeds into things. So it was a good exercise to prepare for something that may or may not come down the line. So it's in their terms, and we always want to know what the customer's thinking, because as they evolve, our definition of convenience will continue to evolve. And we're going to be doing a lot more in the way of learning about consumers on fuel and a whole bunch of other issues. So, Adam, thank you once again for joining us and dissecting what we learned in this latest survey.
Thank you.
And thank you all for listening to Convenience Matters.
Convenience Matters is brought to you by NACS and produced in partnership with Human Factor. For more information, visit convenience.org.